Power doesn't collapse loudly. It fades while everyone assumes it will last. Rome believed its order was permanent, unshakable, absolute. But in places like Nazareth, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like pressure. So what happens when someone grows up inside that and sees it clearly? And that's where the story changes. Nazareth was small, irrelevant, easy to control. Rome didn't need force here, just structure, taxes, labor, obedience, enough to keep people alive, but never free. Every day followed the same pattern: work, pressure, silence, a quiet understanding that everything you had belonged to something above you. And then there was religion, not abstract belief, but control, identity, boundaries. It defined who you were allowed to be, and no one questioned it, because when belief and power align, they don't guide people, they contain them. Everything looked stable, predictable, but underneath, something was forming. Not rebellion, something sharper, clarity. Because when you see a system clearly, you start asking dangerous questions. Why does power avoid scrutiny? Why does peace feel heavy? But they misunderstood something fundamental. Nazareth wasn't producing loyalty, it was producing awareness, and awareness doesn't stay quiet. What they failed to see was that the system wasn't being attacked, it was being understood. And once that happens, collapse is only a matter of time.
Rome didn't just control land, it controlled perception. It built roads that stretched for miles, structures that defied time, systems that functioned with precision, all reinforcing a single idea: this will never fall. Power at this scale doesn't just dominate, it convinces everyone that resistance is pointless. And that belief is what makes it dangerous. Because once people accept permanence, they stop questioning it. In Nazareth, that illusion was everywhere. Rome above, religion within, both reinforcing the same message: this is the way things are, and this is the way they will remain. The temple stood as a symbol of order, authority, and divine structure, while Rome stood as the force that ensured it all held together. Two systems, different in appearance, but aligned in outcome: stability, control, continuity. And this is where arrogance begins to take shape, because when power goes unchallenged for long enough, it stops seeing itself clearly. It no longer adapts, it assumes. It no longer listens, it enforces. It believes its own narrative. But that belief comes with a cost. What they failed to see was that strength can become blindness. The larger the system, the harder it is to notice small shifts, small questions, small disruptions. And those small things are where collapse begins. Because the illusion of invincibility isn't broken by force, it's broken by reality catching up. And by the time that happens, the system doesn't know how to respond. It only knows how to maintain control. But control doesn't fix fractures, it hides them. And hidden fractures don't disappear, they spread.
Power doesn't collapse when it's strong. It collapses when it drifts. Not suddenly, but gradually, almost invisibly. The system still functions, the rituals continue, the structure remains intact, but something underneath begins to shift. In Judea, that shift wasn't obvious at first. The temple still stood, the priests still operated, the system still looked sacred, but function had slowly replaced meaning. What once guided people had started managing them. Access became controlled, participation became conditional, and devotion became transactional. And this is where the system changes without admitting it. Because when authority becomes comfortable, it starts protecting itself instead of what it was built for. Rules expand, barriers increase, and the distance between power and people grows wider. Everything still appears legitimate, but the purpose begins to fade. What they failed to see
was that people notice this, even if they can't explain it. They feel the weight of something that used to give life, now demanding more from them. They feel the shift from guidance to control, and once that feeling sets in, trust begins to erode, slowly, quietly, without confrontation. Because moral drift doesn't trigger alarms, it normalizes itself. Until one day, the system is no longer what it claims to be. It still holds authority, but it no longer holds alignment. And that misalignment is where collapse takes root.
Collapse never arrives without warning, but warnings rarely look like threats. They look small, contained, easy to dismiss. A voice in the distance, a message that doesn't align with the system, something that doesn't fit the structure already in place. Because it doesn't fit, it's ignored. At first, these signals seem insignificant, just another disturbance in an otherwise stable system. But what they carry is different. Not force, not rebellion, but clarity spoken out loud. And clarity is difficult to control once it spreads. Because it doesn't rely on authority, it exposes it. What those in power failed to recognize was that these moments weren't isolated. They were connected. Each question, each challenge, each shift in thinking was part of something building beneath the surface. But the system couldn't respond to that. It only knew how to maintain itself. So instead of listening, it tightened. Instead of adapting, it reinforced. And this is where arrogance becomes fatal. Because ignoring a warning doesn't remove it, it gives it time to grow. What could have been addressed early becomes impossible to contain later. And by the time the system realizes the scale of what it's facing, it's no longer dealing with a message, it's dealing with momentum. Systems don't collapse because they are challenged. They collapse because they cannot adapt when the challenge exposes what they've become. By the time the pressure peaks, everything is already in motion. The system still looks strong, but underneath, it has lost alignment. And when that happens, even a small disruption reveals everything. What seems sudden is inevitable. The response is predictable. Protect the structure, silence the threat, maintain control. Because power doesn't step back, it tightens. But that decision exposes the truth. What looks like strength is fear, and what they try to stop only accelerates what was already unfolding. Because the breaking point isn't where collapse begins, it's where it becomes visible. The system isn't failing in that moment, it's being revealed. And that's where the story shifts. Because collapse isn't just destruction, it's transition. What falls isn't just power, it's the way power was contained. A system built on control gives way to something it cannot own, something internal. And once power shifts inward, control becomes harder to maintain. So the question isn't just what happened then, it's this: how many systems today still believe they are unbreakable?